Hello and welcome to the Focusing Way podcast, Focusing for Better Living. I'm your host, David Battistella. The wind has shifted, we have reset our sails and are exploring new horizons with a new focus on success, leadership, and all things interesting to have more clarity, more focus, and to live a considered life. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Google Play Music, Spotify, and iHeart Radio. And visit our website at thefocusingway.com. As a young child, Friis was always driving his family members crazy, asking questions about anything and everything. He played sports at a high level and began his curiosity journey, which eventually led him to discovering books by the Dalai Lama and Anthony Robbins. His constant curiosity to learn more and desire to contribute to a more positive and fun way of learning about these subjects is the drive behind his podcast, Growth Island. The Growth Island podcast focuses on concrete strategies and shortcuts for how to live a happy, healthy, and meaningful life. Each episode aims to educate, be fun, and leave the listener with at least one tangible thing they can do to improve their life. It is a break from all the doomsday messages and focuses on all the amazing opportunities we have for overcoming them. Mess has a Bachelor in Business and Psychology at Copenhagen Business School and attended master classes in psychology at Harvard University. He also builds health and well-being startups in the venture startup studio, Kring. And joining me now on the Focusing Way podcast, Friis from Growth Island Podcast. Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you so much, David. Really a pleasure to be here with you today.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time to be getting together, and I just want to let our listeners know where we met in London last year. One thing I realized when I met Mess is that, you've got great energy, and you seem to be a real curiosity seeker, and so what I'm interested is just tell me a little bit about the overall idea of Growth Island, that podcast that you run, and what you're bringing to the world with the podcast.
Sure. And so thank you so much for the compliment. So curiosity is something since I was a little child. I had a million questions. So I drove my parents nuts, especially my older brother, with all of my questions about the world that I was so fascinated about. And I guess that went through my entire life, also now in the podcast, that I'm so fascinated about learning new things. And I'm fascinated about what makes us happy, what makes us live a happy, meaningful life. And when I'm digging into all these different areas, I read or listen to experts and so on. Often I'm not the best at re-explaining it. So I found that the podcast would be a good medium to find some of these experts, ask them some of the questions, help translate some of the sometimes complex areas or subjects they're explaining, and then have more people having a chance to dig into it.
How has the experience been for you being a podcaster? Where are you on that journey?
So absolutely fantastic. So I love to talk with people. I'm not very good at writing or fond of that. That drains me from energy, but I get so much energy from talking with other people. So having the chance to talk like Dr. Barry, where I met you in London, and some of the other amazing people is absolutely fantastic having that chance. And I feel very blessed to get the chance to talk to some of these super interesting people.
Yeah. So just on that, you and I met in London at the Health Optimization Summit, where we met through Dr. Barry Morgullin's work, who's known as Dr. B. What was your impression meeting the Grand Master? I mean, I felt charged that whole weekend, and that particular moment that we had together in a room while you recorded your podcast was incredible. Do you have any memories or thoughts about that?
Yeah, so it's actually the biggest experience for me was when he was doing his lecture. I really felt like that energy and that vibe, and there was just something I'm learning more about is the whole being heartfelt and being more in your body, that I've normally mostly gotten through sports, that I got through when he was talking there. And then I found that's something I'm trying to explore more. That has not been what I've been exploring the most in my life. It's mostly been sports, and then using my mind to learn new things. So Dr. B was definitely an eye opener as well, and one of the eye openers at the conference.
Tell me about your sports career.
So I played football or soccer
Yeah.
when I was a kid, and I played handball as well, Olympic handball. So till I was 15 years old, I played sports twice a day. So handball first, and then soccer, or the other way around. And that was fantastic. Being part of a team, really feeling you had a goal and improving and meeting some friends every single day. So, but when I turned 18 or 17, I kind of had to choose if I wanted to continue with sports or I wanted to go another direction. And I chose the direction instead of traveling around the world and learning new things. And many reasons for that. One thing was I had chosen handball and I didn't get that tall, so I had to play in a position that I didn't find as interesting if I wanted to continue playing handball.
It's interesting though that when you were describing that, the first thing that came to my mind was this, the small little version of you out doing sports, and one of the sports requires only the use of your feet.
Yeah.
And the other one requires only the use of your hands. So this having sort of this dexterity with all four extremities, and just taking that back to Dr. B, Dr. B often talks about if you're ever questioning your worth or value in the world, then all you need to do is really look at your own hands and just start to move them and say, I got these two hands, these are two miracles, and by extension our feet. You've just opened this up so beautifully by describing the way you physically use your body to in sporting activity, but that also seemed to move to psychology as well at some point, didn't it?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that started back in my teen years when my parents got divorced, and it wasn't the best divorce as many others. And kind of seeing how my mom was quite sad, that got me very curious in like what drives people, and what can you do to help people like see the more bright side of life. And also growing up, my dad was working with the kids that had problems, and my mom was working as well with kids. So I always grew up with the dinner conversations about people having a hard time and why they had a hard time, and how never to judge people because you never knew the story of why they were in the situation they were.
Yeah. It's also another beautiful message of like non-judgment. So many things you're touching on go directly to focusing, because I mean, focusing is really the wisdom of the body. It's really a practice and exercise developed for two people or by oneself to come inside and start to sort of tap into that innate wisdom that we have inside of all of us, but actually finding a pathway to get into relationship with that and to be actually in a dialogue with the body, right? To actually be actively discovering from that sort of right sense of being place within all of us that we all have. And obviously the thing of being egalitarian and non-judgmental is also a very important part of focusing. But what took you to Harvard? How did that happen?
So first of all, David, I think it's so interesting how your focus is on focusing, and also how you are elaborating on the whole body sensation, understanding what's right. That's something I would say for me is more new in a way. That there's been the last year that I've tried to get deeper into that, where I've mostly gotten it from my sport. So I would say for me, it's a really big learning journey right now to get closer into also making decisions more from the body and what feels right, and not just from issue trees and logical, yeah, not just from the head. So it's really an area that I would love to learn more on about, and I look forward to hearing more about in the podcast when we discuss it, because I think it's so important. And if you don't have that part of your life, you're actually missing something. And if you haven't tried it and be in that feeling, you don't really know what you're missing out on. That's not to make people feel bad out there, but
Yeah.
it's hopefully to make people more curious about what it is. And for me, it was in sport that I was experiencing, and now I'm starting to experience it more in life.
Yeah, I played a lot of sports, and it wasn't only until a few years ago, a very good doctor that I have here in Italy, I had gone to visit him, and we came out of that session and he said, okay, no physical exercise for 3 or 4 months. And I said, well, no, that's just not going to happen. Like, he said, no, I need you to stop entirely. I was trying to figure out why. And he said, I'll tell you why. You've been using physical activity to release the endorphins in your body. And you do that, and that's just another drug, right? So some people take drugs, some people do sports, some people eat certain kinds of foods. There's all kinds of receptors. Paul Chek sort of introduced me to the concept of working in, but still I was physically exerting in a way that was giving me it wasn't helping me. So he said, I need you to get back to a baseline. I need you to do nothing so that you can come to the psychological understanding of like that peaceful space within you, the balanced space, because you can't be you're releasing these endorphins in a way to satisfy something. And I really want you to experience coming back to this baseline, which was really, really an interesting 3 or 4 months. And then after 3 months, we had a checkup and he said, you can start walking now twice a week. And that was, a pretty incredible experience. But just to give you a little background on Jenlin, who invented focusing with a guy named Carl Rogers, he watched 5,000 psychotherapy sessions on tape.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and with students, but there was a 50% line. Like half the people were having great success in psychotherapy, and half were not, or they were in a repeating loop, in a pattern loop. And what he discovered was that the common denominator in the people who were having success in their therapy was that they were feeling some kind of bodily shift. So they would say the lump in their throat moved, their heart dropped, their stomach shifted. And so people say, oh, it's your gut sensation or your body sensation of something. So he began to develop this with another practice that Carl Rogers had, which was called empathic listening, where one person could listen to the other and then only reflect back in a completely non-judgmental way what that person had said to them, so that they could hear their own words coming from not from their mouth to their ear, but from someone else to their ear. And they could check that against their body feeling of something. So that is, in a nutshell, what focusing tries to endeavor. And it's a practice that was really developed so that people like you and I could become focusing partners and share time in a way that we could each be resolving, where I don't need to actually figure it out for you. You have every capacity to do it for yourself. But as being the other human is reflecting something back, that can ignite something in your body sensation, and you can come to rightness on it. I don't even have to know the content of what you're dealing with, which is why I was so attracted to focusing and why I became a trainer and teacher of focusing. But I just wanted to share that for you and for our listeners as well. But I had asked you about your Harvard time.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I was lucky I had the opportunity to go there, and the first class I was studying was the psychology of emotional, behavioral, motivational self-regulation. That was a very, very long title. It took me a while to learn to be able to pronounce or say the entire class's name. It was absolutely fantastic experience. I was very lucky that we were in a small class with 12 students or 20 students, and we had this amazing professor. He had written over 300 articles, which is like one of the most productive professors within psychology apparently in the world. And I had already studied some psychology, so I knew a lot of the big names. And when he was telling the stories about the tea parties, and some of them were tea parties apparently for these professors, it was these big names that he was meeting with. And that learning opportunity of really good looking into like the studies and the challenges with some of the studies, which I think is very important as well when you look into the whole biohacking space with the health optimization. So we were discussing, for example, limited willpower. So Baumeister has done some of the most known studies about that we have limited willpower. So that's often being cited by a lot of people that we have limited willpower. But at the same time, there are studies showing that we only have limited willpower if someone tells us that we have limited willpower. So those dilemmas of what is science and what does science also have, like what's the impact on our minds that we get this science, that was so fascinating.
Wow. That whole concept of just that concept you're talking about of limited willpower. Can you just tell me more about that?
Yeah, so there's the theory, and Baumeister is one of the most known professors that have done these studies, that we only have certain amount of willpower. So for example, if we look at chocolate, I shouldn't eat the chocolate, or I go outside and I shouldn't get that cake, or I should actually now do my homework, or I should now go for a run. That we have a definitive amount of willpower that we can use during the day. So that's one theory. And the other theory is it's more depending on whether you believe you have limited willpower. My personal belief is it's somewhere in the middle, because what you also have to look at is how are these studies done that show that you didn't have limited willpower. Like it's done on white university students, so, and that only had like certain amount of tasks to test it with. So I use it in my personal life that I try and make it easier for me to make decisions, so I don't have to make as many decisions in the day, so I can focus on the more important ones. But I also try and be mindful that I shouldn't limit my mind by thinking that I have this limited willpower.
That's not putting limits on one's own mind is always a nice idea. But you did mention a very key word that's a very big buzzword in our world right now, and that's biohacking. The conference we were at was a sort of health optimization, quote unquote, biohacking conference. What have you learned about the biohacking movement? Where's your curiosity brought you? And maybe just give an overview of what it is, how you understand it to be, and then where that took you.
Yeah, so I came from a big curiosity about psychology and performance with sports. And I think I was around 25 when I started to realize that positive psychology and cognitive behavioral therapy and the different, where you say cognitive models, couldn't always help people. That the body was so important as well. Meaning like your microbiome actually have a big impact, like 90% or 80% of serotonin is being produced in your stomach or in your gut, which is one of the problems for people that are depressed. So I started realizing that the body and other things were pretty important as well. And for me, biohacking is basically the science and art of figuring out what really works. So it's taking science. So we love to look at studies. So the newest studies of what really works. And then it's also the art, because when you look at these amazing studies, you'll see there are all these outliers. And so if you're one of those outliers, it doesn't really help you that a study says for 90% or 70% of people something works. So for me, biohacking is looking at the new studies that might not have reached the newsletters yet, but then also realizing that you might be an outlier. So you have to test and see what works for yourself.
So what would you consider the most common biohacking behaviors or things people do to biohack?
Yes. So I would say there's kind of different schools, or depending on where you're from in the world. So in Scandinavia, we're very much focused on nature. Basically, we had a session here in Copenhagen that I was hosting, a panel debate where we talked about biohacking. And some of the participants were looking quite disappointed after the first 8 minutes, because we mostly talked about how being out in nature is now being proven by more science is really good for you. Really breathing. Different breathing exercises. Dr. Barry as well is a big advocate for that. Cold water, sauna, sleeping, eating clean food. So some of the basics I think are really important, and it's always where you should start. You can always move into something like stem cells or red light therapy or other more advanced things afterwards, but I really think you should start with the basics before you get caught up with too many devices or too many crazy things. But for biohacking, for me, is not putting an implant in your hand. That's really important.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I mean, to me, I think it's fine tuning exactly what the body is responding to, and sort of, in a way, being your own doctor, which is something also Dr. Barry talks about, be your own doctor, be your own guru. And, he talks about it also very much in the form of also the free energy that's around us. One of those things, obviously, that gives us access immediately to that is breathing, is just, and even you and I doing that in this moment just pulls more energy right into our body and into the space. It's amazing when you talked about psychology and performance, because I think for me, one of the greatest examples I've ever seen of that is Tiger Woods.
Mm.
And because Tiger Woods was just on this trajectory that was seemingly incredibly unstoppable. And events happened in his life. And then all of a sudden, this man was incapable of performing, but mechanically, his body from one day to the next had not changed. So, but how did this guy go from, oh, well, all that stuff happened is what people will say. But it's fascinating to me to try to understand why that body, which is, let's call it a hard drive and a software.
Yeah.
Let's do a computer analogy. So the hardware was exactly the same one day to the next, but obviously there was a quote unquote virus in the system, and it did not allow that hardware to work in the same way. And it took a very, very, very long process before we're now talking about him being effective again, years, right?
Mm.
So I don't know. How do you feel? Like, what do you think about that? Like, have you considered that, the whole tiger?
So I think in sports in general, it's so clear that the psychology is like 50% of the performance. Whether you play golf, tennis, or whatever it is, do you believe in yourself? Can you see like getting into the goal and so on? I think it's so essential, and that's also what you see with many of the talents. So someone might be stronger and so on, but many of the people that actually succeed are the ones that have the psychology to actually succeeding.
So tell me about a little bit about like the kind of guests you tend to seek out for your show.
So I always try to find guests that I think is interesting myself to interview. So I
Hey,
was
that's
told,
what I do too.
appreciate it. So I think that's so key that you actually are interested in like hearing what they got to say and you can learn something from. So for me, it's everything from doctors that are experts within a field within the body to positive psychology to leadership and basically anything that can help you live a happy, healthy, and meaningful life. That's kind of the frame of guests that I'm looking for. And ideally people that are like nice to talk to.
Yeah.
So I want to talk to nice people, I think, or nice, I think the whole energy is quite important. So certain people have a really nice positive energy where it's just fantastic to be in their company. So if possible, I always try to look for those guests that have this positive energy because I think it's a better experience for everyone, both me and the guest and also the listeners. And sometimes it's just different energies that match well together.
I think the listeners can actually hear that. Absolutely. There's definitely a component of that lovely energy. But tell me about it as an extension of your learning. Like, what are the things you've learned through that are you're applying, or you're that are helping you on your journey?
Sure. So one of the first things was quite simple. Everyone has been talking about meditating, and I tried to do it several times without really succeeding. And I talked to one of the guests called Alexander, who somehow pointed me towards Insight Timer. And I had already tried Headspace and other apps. I'd even paid for Headspace to kind of get myself committed to actually doing it as a habit trick, but apparently didn't work well enough. But somehow Insight Timer worked for me and the whole intention settings. So I write a gratitude journal down every night. I've done that since 2013.
Hmm.
But I didn't always think about my intention for the next day. And there was something Alexander mentioned. Put in the intention for the next day. Not just what you are grateful for from the current day, but also like what's your intention for the next day. That's been one of the things that I definitely implemented.
Wow, that's very much Dr. B's line too. He very much encourages celebrating wins in the form of a journal, and which are basically goals or intentions that you've set that have happened. So Like, for example, almost every morning, if I'm doing what a journal every day as you're doing, after waking up, after restful sleep, I'm literally writing that down as like a first thing I'm grateful for in the day, having had a good sleep, which sort of sets your day off as a new way forward, right? Like you're like, oh, I'm starting the day grateful for having rested well. And tell me how that experience has been for you, like since you've started doing the intentions.
So I think it's it's just a really nice day to set up the day. Just like when you have goals or different things you're looking at, it points you towards it. I've never read The Secret, but I heard a lot about the book. But the whole thing about thinking about what you want to attract and what you want to get towards, and I guess intention settings is part of that you become aware of it. It's easy to get distracted in our world with notifications coming in and so many things constantly interrupting you. So I think it's really important to be or try to be more mindful so you actually take more control of what direction you want to go with your life. So I think it's one of the simple tools to try to take more control of the direction you want to go in your life.
That's interesting because it leads us right to like our present situation on the planet as we're recording this podcast. A global virus has hit different countries. I'm in Italy as I record this in a lockdown situation, curfew, basically. Moss is in Denmark, where
Mm.
yesterday he was in similar situation. But just one thing we were talking about was this concept of sort of media terrorism, and we're in very, very different times from three-channel universe that I grew up in, three television channels and a few radio stations. We literally cannot escape data coming at us, and that data very often is not designed to make us happier. It's very often designed to distract us or pull us into, in some way, to draw us into a space that we maybe don't, I think you would say, that is not happiness. So, can you maybe just talk a little bit about just your overall thoughts?
Sure. So I think it's of course important to be aware of what's going on and take it serious that we have a problem and that our healthcare system can be run over, and that's why we have to be careful. I think it's just as important to be aware that we don't make ourselves more sick. So worrying too much will actually make the immune system more weak and make the chance of us getting sick higher. So I think we need to be aware of what's happening, but then focus on the positive and what we can actually do, because that will strengthen our immune system and give us a chance to actually go through this better. And it's difficult because the human nature is being super curious about like what can go wrong. So that feeling of constantly checking the news. But as you said, the news they are making money on us clicking. So they are not making it better than it is. So I think it's always important when a situation, don't make it like you don't need to make it better. Just don't make the situation worse than it is. See it for what it is and then get the best out of it.
One of the best things I remember goes back to a concept that a writer named Neil Postman wrote a book I read years ago called The Disappearance of Childhood. But he was often studying the effects of television on children. And at that time, he was saying that children would have seen 800,000 television commercials by the age of 18. But the concept that really put me over of his was that we often would watch TV or a television program and then the commercial would come on. And we would think that we are being sold that product. And what he opened my eyes to was that the product of television is us. We are the product of television because we are sitting in front of that television set. It's them selling us back to the advertiser.
Mm.
And the moment that went off in my head that I'm being sold here, it made me feel kind of like I was willingly engaging in some kind of slavery. Like I was willing to be sold by sitting there. And so it pretty much turned me off television from that time forward. But what I'm realizing now is that if we don't have like serious strategies toward our social media, as you said, clicks are money and every click is you being sold. But you did raise a very important point about immunity and fear. And so, uh, the if we limit the amount we can be shocked, which can be many times a day in a situation that we're living through right now, then we can protect our immune systems by, you know, staying out of that noise, which isn't really, I don't think, doing us any good.
No, and then try and focus on like what's the good in the situation. Like there's definitely a lot of negative, but what positive can you take out of it? This might be a chance to stop and actually reflect a bit more. This might be a chance to have more time to call your family and talk to them. You might not be able to see them, but you might have the chance to actually call them. So I'm not saying that there's not a lot of negatives. It's just it doesn't help us to focus on them. So I would definitely use the focus also to increase the immunity and make sure you stay healthy. Is focus on the good stuff that's happening right now and figure out what are some of the small positive, even though there's a lot of negative, and how can you get the most out of the situation we're in right now. I love the quote that life is not about waiting for the rain to pass, but it's about learning to dance in the rain.
Yeah, beautiful.
And I think it's so accurate in any situation. That's not that you are just an optimist fool, but it's definitely going to be better for your health.
Yeah. If you still have some time,
Sure.
I'd love to hear about Kring.
Yeah. So Kring is a venture studio where we build companies. So we have our own fund, and that makes us possible to build companies that really matter. So we call it an impact fund. We build companies within well-being, health and well-being, or energy. And my big interest is health and well-being. So I look at as well, like, what am I learning in this podcast, or where is there new technology coming out that we could potentially scale so more people can get benefit. So right now we're looking at mental health. That's one thing that's
Wow.
very close to my heart. Is we're getting richer and richer, but more people are getting depressed, sad, lonely, and so on. So there we're looking at how can we create a solution within that problem space so we can help more people.
That's very interesting, and that's probably why the focusing way sort of started, was to focusing had so much of a calming effect in my life that I wanted to share, but it's also leading to this kind of conversation as well. And so tell me about some of the projects Kring has been involved with, like
So the fund started last year. So we are testing out different projects, and the way we work is very much testing stuff before we commit too many resources into it. So we've looked into blood testing and how we can ensure that people get the right dietary and supplement advice so that you actually know what's going on. It's still a test that we're doing right now. We had the first customers or users through, and we could see that some of them had some serious deficiencies where we could actually help them. So that's really interesting. We're still looking at the technology to mature a bit more so we can drive down the cost in regards to making it easy to get the blood. And then we've looked into neurofeedback, still trying to see how we can get that out and make that more accessible. I've tried it myself, and it's an extremely fascinating technology. I really like the conversational therapy, psychology, and so on. But it's fascinating to see how neurofeedback, where you put these electrodes on the brain and it just broadcasts like your signals kind of on a screen, how that can have such a massive impact where conversational therapy just doesn't work that well. We haven't found a way there, but it's something we're looking at. And then right now we're looking at this mental health AI buddy that we're trying to build right now. We got a psychologist that are starting actually on Monday and starting to build some flows. And what we're building there is trying to make it easy, a chatbot to start with, where you can kind of interact. So using cognitive behavioral therapy, which is very protocol based. So helping people when you can say shit hits the fan, or when you're not feeling well and you don't have 4 weeks to wait to get to a psychologist, but you actually want some help here and now. So starting with that, using cognitive behavioral therapy, and then moving into, for example, markers for sleep. So if we can detect that you only slept for 3 hours for 3 days, then that's what we need to focus on and give some tools for that. And we need to help people go out and be social again. That's the loneliness is also nudging people to go and talk to people. And I think this AI buddy can be part of that. So it's not to get people more enslaved to a phone. It's actually the opposite, and also help with good phone hygiene because an iPhone or whatever smartphone can be so powerful and a positive force for your life, but it can also be the opposite. And I believe that today it's probably having more of a negative effect for many people because we're using the phone wrong. So we wanna try and do something about that.
How would you what are you seeing in that more than anything else in terms of when you say using the phone wrong?
So I think that we are constantly looking at our phone. Like if you have, so my iPhone is telling me how many times I pick it up, and even though I try to be mindful, it's scary. Like
I've done that. It is frightening.
you're looking at them like, am I that addicted to my phone? And how much you go to, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, and so on. So I've set limits for how much I can go to these different platforms because I'm human like everyone else. I have all of the flaws of any other human being, and our nature of constantly getting that dopamine kick when we take up our phone. So I put blockage on how much I can use my phone, and I think that could be a great help. So something as simple as actually just limiting how much you use your phone, like social media, whether you have notifications coming up all the time. So something very concrete and simple. I don't have notifications apart from cell phone calls or text message. Those are the only notifications that I get. And when I open my phone, I don't have my email as the first thing. I used to have that, but I move it so I kind of have to scroll a few times.
Mm-hmm.
So I can only see notifications if I'm scrolling. So my first screen is very clean. So again, when I open up the phone, I don't get that constant like, oh, there's a notification from something, or like there's that little number that means that my animal brain goes like nuts that I have to press it.
Facebook's little red dot that they
Yeah,
tested and they know.
it works. It turns something on our animal brain. So that's why I think it's so important to be mindful of how you actually use your phone. So I turn my phone on flight mode before I go to bed. I try. I'm not always that good, but I try to put it at sleep, so to say. So I put it at a sleep mode at 9 or 10 o'clock. So I don't have the phone either in my bedroom. I do have, though, another phone, but that's not connected, but that I only use for writing down my gratitude journal. So, and I don't have access to any of the apps or anything else. I only have access to notes so I can write my gratitude journal. But it's so easy, right? And I think we gotta help ourselves be mindful of that we're just human beings and we have these flaws. So, for example, putting the phone in the living room or in the kitchen means that you're not constantly like reaching out for it. So that's at least been helping me to use my phone more mindful.
I always find the irony is that they called them smartphones and they're actually designed to actually sort of put us to sleep.
Yes.
There's a consciousness loss of consciousness in a sense that is associated, that goes along with these devices. There's just no other way to put it, and we're all guilty of it. It's absolutely we're
We're just human beings, and it really hits something in us. It's whether you try to be aware or not, it's you will often still fall in. So that's why I think it's so important That's why I find it very helpful to kind of make these things where I move it away. So we know habit-wise as well, if something is right next to you, you're going to grab it more. If you have chocolate or candy in your home, you're going to be much more likely to actually eat it. So I try as much as possible to engineer my life around my human flaws because it just makes it easier not to make the things that we know are bad for us.
yeah. I was just going back to biohacking for a second. Well, what are the top Danish biohacks in your mind?
Oh, good question. So I can say what I'm doing myself. I think that might be easier. I have a hard time saying what the top biohacks are because it really depends on where you are in your life and what you need.
Yeah.
So, do you need better sleep? Well, is it then turning like having blue blockers, or is it that you want more energy? Is it something to do with your microbiome? You have gut issues and so on. So, I think it really depends. So, what I do is I turn off my phone. It starts in the night before I go to bed fairly early. I start meditating in the morning. I do cold showers. I often eat smoothies with all kind of different greens in, which is also semi-biohacking. Then I have my red light panel that I use for my skin, my psoriasis on my legs. I can say that I can see it's working really big. That's also the hard thing with so many things with health is it takes a while before you really see the difference. Other simple things, I have my Muse that I've used for meditation. I don't always use it, but Muse is a form of neurofeedback to sense the brain. There's some discussion about whether it's that helpful or not. If you have osteoporosis, then something like OsteoStrong would be super helpful for you. I don't have any problems with my bones. So for me, that's not the best biohack, but I had a friend that's younger than myself that actually did have some bad results when it came to bones. So for him, it would be really good. For me, I felt much stronger doing it. This weird way of feeling stronger in my entire body from sitting with these weird machines 4 times. That was really strange. Some other things are the sauna, which the Finnish are very happy about. So I think there's kind of the Scandinavian biohacking, like Ollie off from the Danish, or not the Finnish biohacking center, and he's a big fan of the sauna and cold water and so on. And I see that that's at least some of the things we're doing here in Denmark as well, quite a lot.
I have to ask you, infrared or traditional sauna?
So I have been told that infrared is best, but I have a normal sauna close to me, so that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a full religion, and then there's whether it's a hot stone or how it's an electric sauna and so on. The Finnish is not as big fans of the electric sauna, something with electrodes coming out in the air as well. But I have to say that I'm not that deep into the big difference.
The other thing you'd mentioned was nature and just the effects of nature. Would you put that high on the list of the Danish biohack?
For sure. So I think the Scandinavian way is very much looking at what have been some of the alternative things that we now have science to back. So that we can now see meditation, we can now see something happens with grounding and so on. So having that as the foundation, and then looking into stem cells, looking into red light, mimicking that we're living in an unnatural world, that we need this light, looking into mushrooms, but mushrooms are still natural. And I'm not talking about the mushrooms that's going to make you weird. I'm just talking about lion's mane, reishi, and so on. I think that's very much part of the Scandinavian way of looking at it. And of course, floating tanks and the big red lights and all of that stuff is super interesting. It's so fascinating also with neurofeedback, which is a lot more advanced. Like, what can you actually do? And I've seen some pretty crazy results for some friends with neurofeedback, and I would definitely put that into the mix if that's something that can help you out.
I think one of the first times I ever floated was maybe 1988 or 89 was one of the first times I did sensory deprivation. And wow, that was a trip. That was and it's very interesting to see that it's still around and people are still using that as a therapy. But tell me now what the North American biohack, maybe you could talk a bit about what you've seen in the North American side of biohacking.
Sure. So you have Dave Asprey, who's kind of the father of biohacking, right? He coined the term, and I think he's definitely at the forefront of like what technology can you use and what products. So whether that is, I don't even remember the name of this thing you can put on your brain as well, the Halo, I think it is. It's also supposed to stimulate your brain. We actually have something in Denmark as well called, what's the name again? Well, a guy called Balder who made this thing that can stimulate your brain as well. So what I'm seeing at least is the North Americans still have the focus on nature and so on, but they also have a stronger focus on technology. Also very natural coming from California, and you have Silicon Valley and all of the tech money being poured into it. So I think it's very natural also from where you're from.
Yeah. Just in terms of your podcast, which episodes would you want people to have a listen to when they go over to Growth Island?
It's a really good question. So I think it really depends on where you are in your life. One of the episodes that I personally really like is an episode with a guy called Thomas Sylvestre. I think the name is Finding a Way When the Doctor Says There's No Way. And he is such an inspiring story about having hardship and the doctor saying there's nothing to do and kind of finding a way through. And he is such a positive spirit. He is extremely smart, but he's so positive and he's just so pleasant to be around. So that would be one of the top episodes. I think one of the other ones is with Chuck Hazzard, and that's about sleep. And the reason why I like that so much is because it's the one episode about sleep where you don't hear this on other podcasts. So many of my podcasts, I'll be honest and say you can find similar information on many other podcasts with the same subjects and same guests. But this one with Chuck was different about what we actually know about deep sleep and the sleep trackers, and how some of these sleep trackers can actually make people ill as well with the nocebo effect. So that's another episode that I'm really proud of, because it's different than what you'll find at other podcasts. And I probably listened to 20 different sleep podcast episodes. So that's definitely different.
Wow, that's fabulous. Thank you for that. So for everyone out there, it's Growth Island. My guest has been Mes Friis. It's been a wonderful time speaking with you, Mes. And I just feel like as this time has passed, our connection has deepened.
Thank you so much, David. And thank you so much for inviting me. It's really been a pleasure talking to you. And I look forward to this Corona being done, so that I'll hopefully see you in Italy or somewhere else around the world and share some more experiences.
Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure.
Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Google Play Music, Spotify, and iHeart Radio. And visit our website at thefocusingway.com.